So 115 Brits have travelled to Switzerland to end their lives to date. How many of their relatives have been prosecuted for helping them? The answer is none.
Thanks so much. You're watching The Right Stuff. We're live on 5 this Friday morning with Narina Pallo and Mel Kidroych and Sanjeev Bhaskar. More on all of them, by the way, online on our website, 5.tv/rightstuff. Have you seen it, folks? It's really good, yeah. It's worthy of a woo. Now then, after the next break, we're going to be finding out if you would like to see a Dignitas-style clinic, like the one they have in Switzerland, opening here in the UK. 0207 173 5555 is the number, of course. Give us a tinkle and let the country know what you're thinking. But before we get on to that, we're going to start looking at the subject of the right to die. And it is a huge issue, and I think fair to say one that divides the nation. So we're going to start with the area that's making headlines this morning, and that's this new advice, this clarity, if you like, that was offered by the head of the CPS, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer. Now, he set out a range of factors that must be taken into account when deciding whether or not to prosecute someone who's helped a loved one to die. The law on assisted suicide hasn't changed. It's still illegal, and it carries a sentence of up to 14 years jail. But not everyone who helps a loved one will end up being prosecuted. The CPS will use discretion. They would look to see if the helper was motivated by financial gain, that they could get something from the will, if you like. They'd also want to know if the victim or the patient was in a fit state to make an informed and voluntary decision about their death. And another thing, doctors must not be allowed to help their patients die. Starmer also made it clear there'll be no guarantees for those who help a loved one commit suicide, which is at the heart of Debbie Purdy's campaign. Debbie has MS and wants a guarantee that her husband Omar won't face prosecution if he helps her end her life. Welcome, Debbie. Lovely to meet you at last. So what did you think of Keir Starmer's clarity yesterday?
I think he did the best that could be done under the circumstances. He's not an elected politician. He's an appointed person. So he shouldn't be in a position to change the law, and he didn't attempt to do that. He just tried to clarify the law that exists, and I think what he did is really important. He tried to differentiate between compassionate support for somebody who has made a decision about their own lives and somebody who has malicious intent and who wants to inherit a stamp collection.
That is true, but he hasn't really helped you, has he?
Well, to be honest, journalism has probably helped me more in a lot of ways, because people are aware that if I make a decision, it's my decision. But there are thousands of people who commit suicide every year because they are frightened of what will happen, and that is not... there's nothing that is going to absolutely guarantee anything for those people. There's not even a format where people can discuss before they die to find out whether people they love will be affected by the law, whether the medical profession can offer some alternative pain medication, whether social services can maybe move the kind of social situation they're in. And those things should be explored before people die.
But this requires...
a new law.
A new law, which requires MPs... I'm not going to say grasping the net anymore, because Mel's just going to jump in, but it requires MPs getting involved with a decision that, from my outside perspective, they seem very reluctant to do.
I think... Exactly, and they should be prepared to. Thousands of people are dying because they are scared of their future. They're scared of what will happen. And people can say, but it isn't terminal, you know, multiple sclerosis, for instance, isn't terminal. We can manage pain better. But the fact is, people are scared of what is happening to them and their bodies. And if we had Terry Pratchett's idea of...
a committee, wasn't it? He was thinking that you would go before some kind of board.
Before you die, then you can say what worries you most. And if you say, I'm scared of being a burden to my family, your family have the opportunities to say, Auntie May, you're not a burden, I love having you here. You give doctors an opportunity to say, you've got the wrong medication, maybe we can change it in this way. Social services have got the opportunity of saying, we shouldn't have a 43-year-old woman in an old people's home. We should move the social situation she's in. it gives the opportunity to save that person's life.
OK, now, I think you're helping me introduce another expert that we have with us, and that's Dr John Wiles from the organisation Care Not Killing. He's a consultant in palliative care, has been for many years. You two, I mean, I'm thinking that palliative care, the opportunity to speak perhaps to patients in a tribunal-type setting might be a good thing, would it not?
I don't think that's the way forward, really. I mean, I welcome what's happened yesterday. I welcome the fact that there's an affirmation that the law hasn't changed. I think the draft guidelines were flawed and they've been improved,
right, in
as much there's no assumption in the new guidelines that your closest relative necessarily is looking after you. And you know, there is no discretion to say that we should treat people who are terminally ill or who have a disease or a disability different than the rest of the population. So I think those clarifications are really helpful. I still have concerns that, although I agree that, you know, from your evidence when you introduced this topic was that nobody's been prosecuted. So it's obvious that we have a strong law and we have compassion in its interpretation. And we now welcome in the new guidelines as an element to explain that compassion, but how you measure that and how you can be sure that somebody acts wholly in a compassionate way, I think the future will determine, you know, whether that's workable or not.
Would you like to see MPs wrestle with this in Parliament?
Well, I mean, the government and certainly the House of Lords has wrestled with this repeatedly in the last 5 years and strongly come out that they don't want to change the law. And although I hear what Debbie's saying, I think what we have to appreciate is that the law is there for the whole of society. And changing the law and allowing people to be killed, I think many people in society feel very threatened and very vulnerable about that. And I think the law has a duty to protect those people, and that's why we were pleased to see that the law is being left in place.
OK, so Debbie, I know you want to have a quick word again.
Well, I'd just say that what we have at the moment is that a lot of people are losing their lives early because there is no law in place, there are no safeguards, and that if we had a proper open law with a bright light shining on what is needed by people, then I think people would...
When you say that people are losing their lives, are you saying that people are... What you have said is, if I don't get clarity for Omo, if I'm not aware, if I'm not convinced that he will be free from prosecution should he assist me in taking you to Dignitas, if say we were to go to Switzerland, if that doesn't happen, then I will end my life earlier than I would otherwise do because I would make my own way there. Is that what you mean, that other people are doing the same thing? They are choosing to end their lives earlier while they can control it.
And not just going to Switzerland, because that has a financial implication.
It does indeed.
So not everyone chooses that. But the suicide rates amongst people who have multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, MND, Huntington's, very high, much higher than the national average. And those people are taking their lives when they can physically do it themselves. So they're not waiting. And it's possible my life will never become unbearable. And yet I would rather die early than risk the man I love being prosecuted. And because that would be the most torturous thing for me.
I need to ask you something else. Now, I have to declare an interest to the people at home, which is that I recently decided to become, I was invited to and I've accepted to become a patron for Dignity in Dying. And I've done that after a long period of consideration because my father, when he was seriously ill and died, he fought tooth and nail. He didn't want an early exit or anything. He was going to go naturally, and I had to balance what he went through with how I feel. So I have that view, and I want to just make that clear. What do you make of the case of Daniel James, who... He had a maintainable condition after this rugby accident, terrible rugby accident, paralysed, having, in his view, a miserable life, but his parents didn't want him to die. Maintained condition, is that an acceptable